Yeah, I don't know why it's like malware is just taking over my computer.
All right, we'll see what happens.
Let's do it. You know what? The people will have a backstory for this episode for sure.
Exactly. Take three. Here we
Right.
go. Hey everyone, welcome back. It's Ashley, and today I am joined by Chris Eversley. Chris is a former professional basketball player turned business leader, coach, and entrepreneur. He's the founder of Overtime Solutions, helping student athletes prepare for life after sport and leveraging his performance mindset to inspire and equip teams and organizations to reach their full potential. Chris is a keynote speaker, podcast host, and beyond all the titles and accolades, he is a people person with
That's right.
a true passion to help others on their unique journeys. And as a former basketball player myself, you all know how excited I am for this conversation. So, with that, Chris, welcome. Thanks so much for joining me.
No, thank you. I realize I probably should shorten down what I'm telling people I'm doing because it sounds like I'm getting introduced at the Emmys, but we'll keep it pushing for now.
That's amazing. No, you're up to some great stuff. I'm really excited that we're connected. And before we get started, we got to give a shout out to our mutual friend, Vaughn Damone, who kindly introduced us. She was on this podcast a couple of months ago, and actually, she mentioned your name in that episode because
Hmm.
I had shared a bit about my struggle with performance pressure and the identity crisis I had when I stopped playing basketball. And she was like, "Oh, you gotta, I have this friend Chris, who was a pro basketball player, and he went through this whole process of like what happens after sport and, how much of who you are is tied to your sport." So I'm really excited that we could connect here.
Oh no, indeed. Shout out to Vaughn. She's been a great person to know. Funny story about that, just for listeners, to show you that connections can sometimes turn into a lot of cool things down the road. I actually used to work in a tech sales role during COVID and tried to pitch to her one of our services or something. And this was in 2020, and she actually didn't even like she didn't end up going with it, but we actually ended up just staying friends and we would go get lunch every quarter, every half a year, and then just kept in contact. And now we just try to find ways to work together. And even when we can't, it ends with opportunities like this where she can refer me to somebody or I can refer her to somebody. And we can just continue to tell our own respective stories. But Vaughn, one day we will. But thank you for this opportunity. And Ashley, thank you for having me as well.
For sure. And yeah, I love that. It's so true. I mean, it's the power of connection with one another, and you really never know where that can go and how that leads and who else, how your world can just open up to all new possibilities through one another. So I think it's, yeah, really awesome. So this podcast is all about our personal journeys and stories of overcoming and perseverance. And what I know about you is that you played D1 basketball at Cal Poly, leading them to its first ever NCAA tournament appearance and then going on to play internationally. So I want to kick things off. If you could just take us down that journey a bit as an athlete and some of the transitions that you went through.
Yeah, I think I'm constantly reminded with each March Madness that I'm just getting older and older. So now there's been 11 years since we went to the tournament, but it's just been one of those things that with each passing year you just appreciate it more because you know how it is being an athlete. We form these connections with people and everybody goes their own ways after college. And I think it's important to be able to still have those plants per se and water them and make sure people are good on their own respective journeys. But going back down memory lane, it's something that I think I'll never forget. And I'm always grateful when this time of year comes around because you get to see all these kids realizing their dreams. You have kids coming from various backgrounds. Some kids are well off and they just grow up and go on to be, superstars or whatever it is. You have a lot of kids who are from underprivileged populations who go on to become these superstars. And before you and I got into the game, or well, when you and I were in the game, we weren't getting paid 200, $300,000 to be able to go out here and do what we got to do. So just seeing kids get the opportunity for themselves and their families to really transform their lives even earlier without having to go pro and all these different things. It's something that I'm not salty about by any bit. I think that athletes being paid for their NIL or their they're just themselves is important. It's long overdue. But the transition for me back in the day was simple. Graduated, and like everybody else, I mean, I'm a broke college kid, so it's time to go play professionally. So at that time, that was the only way you could make money, right? Based on your skills. So 2 weeks after graduation, I was on a plane to Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia. So that is a world of difference. And it was a 12-hour flight, or no, excuse me, that was a 15-hour flight, 12-hour time difference. And 2 weeks out of graduation, it was just a complete world flip. At the time, I was in a relationship. So just balancing all those things, being 22 years old and things that come with that. And I look back every single year, again, being 11 years out of college and thinking about how much I've grown in the past 11 years and how many different versions of myself that I've been. So the transition never stops. To answer your question, and for our viewers out there, I think it's something to really lean into. And just like we do on basketball, this week of my newsletter, the focus was pivoting. So we just pivot, and we pivot to score. Sometimes we pivot to shoot. Sometimes we pivot to get a better look at a pass or whatever it is. But embracing that, and I think that's super important for anybody going through any transition out there.
I love that. And I want to go back. I have questions on your time overseas, but
Uh-huh.
you just brought up your newsletter drop this week, and that was actually something that I wanted to bring up as a new subscriber,
Hey.
to the Eversley Edge. I'm getting this in my inbox, and so I read the one this week on pivot, and I love that because I mean, as a basketball player, right, is speaking my language, and for those who don't know, in basketball, it's when you have one foot planted and the other is then free to move, and you can make you make your move accordingly, and it's a great analogy I think for life because we have choices and we have options and things change and we have challenges that come and we have to move accordingly, and so I just wanted to go a little bit deeper there and hear your thoughts on what a pivot posture, I guess, looks like to you and what that means to you.
Yeah, I think that's a great question. And I'm going to try to really make it enjoyable from an analogy standpoint for our listeners out there. But in basketball, we have a fundamental principle of the triple threat. From the triple threat, you're usually holding the ball at your hip away from the defender. And that way, I have three options: I can pass, shoot, or dribble. Right now, say, for example, if you're dribbling down the court and you pick up your dribble, unless you're in today's NBA, you can no longer dribble. But today's rules are a little, for up for interpretation. But in theory, now you have the option to pivot. So your feet are planted, and once you've established a pivot foot, which is the foot that's in the ground that can no longer move, the other one can go do 360s like a ballerina as much as you want. But what you're doing in that pivot is trying to establish a better position for your next play. So again, going back to our triple threat, I'm looking for a better pass, I'm looking for a better shot, and no more dribble. So two out of the three options are good. One of them's illegal, get you taken out the game and sat at the end of the bench and just ridiculed. But the reason I love the pivot as something to draw on as a parallel between business and sport and life is because you have an opportunity to do something and you're never truly stuck, no matter how much you think you are. I've been in plenty of traps. I'm sure you have as well. You're in the corner, even though coach told you a million times, don't go there. And you have the sideline as a defender, and you feel like your back is against the wall. Now, in the 11 years since college, I felt like that a lot of days in my life, whether it's been at work, whether it's been with my family, whatever it is, I feel like my back is up against the wall. But if I still have the ball in my hand, which in my opinion is equivalent to you breathing and being alive, you have the opportunity to make a better play. And sometimes it's just a matter of moving your body or moving your mind in a way that allows you to see your path better. So hopefully that is a little bit of a framework that makes a lot of sense for a lot of people out there. I just love talking in sports analogies and metaphors. As a new subscriber, you're going to get that every single week. So if that interests you, definitely come check us out.
Yeah, no, I love that. I think it's so good. I definitely have found myself there. I still find myself there, right? Where
Mhm.
you're stuck and then you even put yourself in a position like in the corner on the basketball floor, right? Where you're just, there's another defender there by the line that doesn't need to be there and you find yourself there and then okay, you're trapped and what do you do? But there's always a decision to be made in a way that we can that we can navigate out of things, and we do, and I believe that it's through those times where we do have those pivots and we adjust and we move forward accordingly, that's how we're building the endurance within us to be able to keep going for that next challenge that's going to come, because it's inevitable in life that we're going to encounter these situations, and pivots, are necessary, but we have the power within us to be able to make powerful decisions moving forward.
Right. And that's true. And that's the thing I love about sport and art, are what I tell people are the last two unifying things that we have as a society. Everything else can pretty much be divisive, right? So that's where I've realized that a medium that a lot of people can get behind is using sport as an analogy, right? So in you and I's case, we have basketball. We're out there with four other players. Guess what? You're probably not going through life as a lone wolf. And if you are, I'm hoping you have a team of people who can at least support you in one way or another. But when you make a pivot to pass, guess what? You're putting somebody else in a better position to score, which brings up the entire team score on the scoreboard. So I think it's important for people to really understand that sometimes you can pivot to score, and a lot of people love to pivot to score because they want all the glory, they want all the points. But at the end of the day, did you and your team win the game? And that's something I want people to be able to look into the mirror at the end of the day and say, wow, I contributed to a win. I didn't just contribute to me scoring 30 and my opponent scoring 35 and we lost.
That's so good. And there's teams that, yeah, that how does that translate into business, right? We all, depending on where you are and what you're doing, typically we're working together with one another across, functions, departments, things like that, or at least we have in our careers, right, at some point. And you have to work together for common goals, and it translates in other areas of life and just your support systems and friends and things like that, that we're really better together, and we really need each other. So I wanted to go back to your time when you played internationally. At such a young age, what are some of the things that you learned being overseas, immersed in different cultures, and having teammates from different backgrounds, and just that experience as a whole? What are some of those big takeaways, and how has that helped, your own development and growth?
Honestly, the most important thing I learned was not even on a basketball court. It was the fact of me being in Southeast Asia. I played in Southeast Asia for 3 seasons, and I played in Europe for two, Belgium and Germany, respectively. And the biggest life lesson that I learned actually was about the people that I encountered. So we were in the Philippines, and people in the Philippines absolutely love basketball. If you don't know about Filipino basketball, then you need to definitely look into it. They got their whole NBA situation going on. They got an Eastern Conference and Western Conference. For all my sports bettors, if you up at 3 a.m., you can go bet on them. But it's definitely something that is interesting because you realize that people overseas, in my experience, are exponentially happier with a fraction of what we have here in America. And I think it's very important to realize that because not only in sport, but just in general life, people can be missing limbs, people can be missing family members, they can be doing all of these different things, which we would perceive as severe deficits as a personal, physical, emotional level. But they're exponentially as happy because they still have a breath, they still have their mind. Like those types of things are the things that matters. And I really think that me being in those experiences and realizing that I'm about to go out and play a child's game, for I'm getting paid to do it. And these are people who would never be able to go afford tickets at a Lakers versus Mavs game or a Lakers versus Warriors game, but they enjoy basketball. They enjoy sport because it really gives them a chance to idolize something, to be unified with their friends and family. And you to take it even a step further, you look at it in soccer. In the European markets, people love soccer. And it's just something that brings people together. So the fact that people can find the sense of joy in even the smallest things really opened my eyes to the fact of I have everything to be grateful for. And it is my job to wake up every day. And as somebody who is living in America, and at this point as a CEO, as a business person, all these things we mentioned, it's my responsibility to give back to people in a way of inspiration and motivation. I've been very fortunate to make it this far in my life, but what good are all these experiences if I can't give back to inspire somebody else so they can start their own journey? So again, that's nothing I can learn on a basketball court. I mean, I can miss a free throw. That's not going to give me that life lesson, right? I can win a championship. It's not going to give me that life lesson.
How much do you think that that influenced you then, in terms of just allowing you to play freely on the court? putting everything into perspective in that way.
Two things. And the latter of them we'll probably get into a little bit later because it's been more of a lifestyle shift in the past 6 months. But the first one being that it's a child's game, as I mentioned before. It's not that serious. If I go up here and I miss this free throw, nobody's going to die, right? However, the surgeons, the doctors, the first responders out there, if they make a mistake, then there's a chaotic outcome or potentially chaotic outcome, right? So I think for me, it allowed me to play freely because I realized that whatever happens in these next 40 minutes isn't going to impact my life in the next couple of days to a way where I'm going to be drastically in danger. The worst thing that can happen is I go in the locker room, the owner of the team comes in and says, Chris, you suck, you're going home tomorrow. Guess what? That's fine. And that kind of happened one day, but it is what it is. That's just what happens. And for those of our listeners out there who are unfamiliar with professional basketball and just professional sports in general in other countries, if you are an American on a team and you're considered an import, your life is on the line every night. Every metaphorically speaking, your basketball career is on the line every night because I've had friends who I've played against, they had a bad game, they were on a flight back to LA the next day because it's very cutthroat. Because in our situation, especially in Asia, you have a team full of local players and then you have two American imports. So you think about how many players that graduated that didn't go to the NBA, they didn't go to the G League, and they didn't go to a top Euro League team. Everybody's out here fighting for that same piece of bread, right? So if you mess up one night or you had a couple bad games in a row, they're just going to go find the next person. It's the similar situation with you at your
Oof.
job. No, it's the truth. It's very cutthroat, but it's the same thing at your job, right? If you don't do your job, you can get cut. They'll come out. Everybody's replaceable. So it really just made me refocus on my purpose and realizing that there isn't a situation out there where I ever feel as though I'm in danger at somebody else's expense. Right. And I think that's something where people get caught up in nowadays, especially on the employment market with things looking as dire as they are. I just want people to think about fulfilling work and what your purpose is. Because if you make all the money in the world, but you lost so much time chasing it, or you didn't get to spend as much time with your family or your kids before they go off to college, that trade isn't really fair. So I think that's important. And that's something that I learned is just redefining what my purpose was. And that's just finding fulfilling work every day.
Totally. That makes a ton of sense. And going off of that, I'm really curious to hear. I mentioned earlier about some of my struggle with the identity crisis after playing and, just finding that kind of sense of purpose or like now how can I use all of these things that I have learned throughout my own experience and actually partner with those learnings and combined that with other skills that I learned from school and education, and then where do I fit in then, and what do I do in that way? And you used a really cool analogy in a conversation I heard about kind of like mixing these paints and that. Um, and I would love for you to speak on that, but I'm really curious too, just about your own detaching self and what you do from who you are.
All right. So, a quick rundown. Thank you for bringing up the paint analogy because it's also a very simple way to explain this to our listeners out there who may not be watching us visually. But I go through life with one question in mind when it comes to business and sometimes the sport. What is the unique problem that I can solve based off of the experiences that I've had? Right. So it requires a level of self-awareness because you have to know what you're good at, and have to requires how you can help people and why they should give a damn to listen to you. Right. So for me, I took my professional sports experience and then I took my employment background and I said, here's this red paint over here that I did for 2 decades. Here's this blue paint that I've dabbled in as an employee and as a founder slash CEO. Let me put those together because they're the two things in the world that are uniquely me that are going to essentially allow me to paint a picture that I can only paint. Right. So I think that's the most important thing I want people to really look at is what do you do better than anybody in the world? And it requires a level of chest beating, which is fine. I think that's really important. But, to know that you can go out here and attach yourself to something that you're going to wake up every day and really get behind is super important. But going back into the detachment of yourself away from a thing, whether it's a business, whether it's a person, whether it's a job, I paint it to people like this. Imagine you are a house, okay? And if you're in LA, it might be a little studio. You know what I'm saying? If you're in Texas, it's going to be a 16-bedroom mansion. But that's beside the point. I'm not salty about my cost of living out here in LA. Okay. But the theory is that each room in your house should be dedicated to a version of your identity. Okay. However, at the end of the day, Chris Eversley is on that mortgage. Chris Eversley is on all those utilities. So the house belongs to Chris Eversley, but there's a bedroom, there's a bathroom, there's a living room, there's a studio. So each one of those places in your house needs to have their own identity of who you are. So, for example, if you're a business owner, you're going to spend a lot of time in your office, metaphorically speaking. If you are a fitness person, you're going to have a larger home gym. If you spend a lot of time doing skincare, you're going to spend more time in the bathroom or the vanity. But I challenge people to just sit down and get a sheet of paper and draw out a floor plan and say, oh, I realize I spend a lot of time in my office. Well, guess what? Your office is probably going to be bigger in square footage than your bedroom. Your gym is going to be bigger than your bathroom if you're a fitness person. So when you start to conceptualize it like that, it really starts to make sense because it gets out of your head. Oh, these are the things I'm actually spending time on. So let me divert my energy there because that's where my passions are. And that doesn't mean that I can't go to sleep in a bedroom and take a nap, but it just means that I'm not wasting time on things that I thought were important up here with every other thought that races through my mind in a day.
Even just you describing that, I can imagine visually what that does when you put that down on paper, and even having that self-awareness too. I've went through a lot of different transitions, in my career, and kind of asking myself those questions like, oh, what's really going to stick? What do I really like to do? What do I want to do? All these kind of questions. We're all kind of searching for that thing. Like we all want to feel like we have this kind of purpose in a way, and really find that thing that lights us up, that's going to sustain over time and we're really thriving in.
I want to say something on that too, just to kind of wrap up this analogy really nicely. Just because you buy one house doesn't mean you can't sell it and buy a bigger house, right? Same thing on the market is the same thing you as a person. So you and I know from an identity perspective, we're not who we are when we were in college. So that means, guess what? We sold the house that we were in college. We bought a bigger house and now we do more things because we have more time and more responsibility. So when you're having these conversations with yourself about like, oh, I want to pivot, I want to do these types of things, that's perfectly okay. You selling a house to buy another house is technically a pivot. You leaving a job to go to another job is technically a pivot. So you can just, guess what? When you sell one house, take that sheet of paper, put it in the shredder, make sure you got no personal information on there, draw up another house. And that's what it is, right? So you can go get a notepad and draw as many houses as you want to because we're never going to stop evolving, and nor should you.
You know what that sounds a lot like, which is a great transition, is being unboxable.
Nice. Nice.
Yes. I love that. I listened to a recent podcast you were on, and just describing that as an athlete, it's rare fitting into a box. And so you talk about being unboxable. So I'd love to hear more about that mindset, giving yourself that permission to change, to evolve, to expand on your vision, where what your vision was 10 years ago maybe not be the same. And that's actually okay. And it means that you're evolving.
Yes. And I think the concept of being unboxable is it stems from a lot of things. It stems from the fact that sometimes your unique path isn't going to be what the job description says. That's kind of the first thing. The second part of it has a bit of a DEI component to it. And I know there's a lot of DEI stuff going on right now, and I'm really still big on that. I'm an advocate for that because I believe that people should have equal opportunities for a lot of things. So we're just going to speak in you and I's context for this conversation. But for example, the DEI component of this is okay, I'm this black man from the south side of Chicago. I'm automatically getting put into a box, a statistic by someone out there that says, oh, I'm not going to do X, Y, and Z. I've exceeded those expectations. Now it's my job to give back. You can go into the workplace and you could have a PhD, PMP, LCL, ACL, all these things. And because you're a woman, unfortunately, some man is going to look at this and say she's underqualified for this role, even though you can do the job 10 times better than whoever is behind you that is a man, correct? So, this concept of being unboxable is just because you don't feel as though your qualifications may check the boxes that employment JDs are essentially looking for, doesn't mean you're not qualified for doing the job. And more times than not, because of you being an athlete, you're going to have a better perspective of adaptability, motivation, all these different things to what you mentioned earlier. If you've been an athlete in any capacity, and I'm talking about elite athlete, I'm talking about college athlete, I'm talking about my pickleball weekend warriors out there. Like you already know what it is in terms of being competitive, but those are the things that people really need to hone in on. And I think for a lot of people with unconventional backgrounds, just because you don't see 16 years of experience, you have to have been the president of Malaysia, you have to do all these different things. Like, no, that's not the case, right? In all seriousness, I don't want people's unconventional backgrounds to make them think that they're ever underqualified to do a job. Because odds are, if you've been competitive in any aspect of life, you can learn a new skill, but I can't teach you decision making under pressure. I can't teach you the will to just adapt to your circumstances. I can teach you Microsoft Office. I can teach you Canva. So those are things that are easily software upgradable. Hardware upgradable things I can't are non-negotiables, right? So I think that's the way I put it to people is the thought of being unboxable is just realizing, okay, I may have an unconventional background, but that doesn't mean I can't go out and potentially do this job better than anybody else. And that's just speaking on more broad and less general things. Obviously, I'm not telling people out there to go be a surgeon. Go to school. I don't want you messing nobody up and getting sued. All right. But for the most part, you have the ability to do whatever you set your mind to. And you just have to realize that there's a lot of societal constructs out there that are trying to stop you. So break out of that damn box.
I love that. I love that. And I think too, I would love to hear your thoughts on this as well, but how influential our own stories are in that process and really owning that, because I think sometimes you can see something on paper, right? Or there's this transition or that transition, or why are you only here for this? Or why did you have that job? But there's so much more to each and every one of us that is unique, that these skills that can't translate on you can't what's the word for it, right? Like you can't put
Quantify.
those on paper. Totally.
Right.
But as an athlete, and of course I think not just as an athlete, but in each and every one of us, right, we have our own unique experiences that we're learning from, that we bring these different skills to the table that you just can't put on paper. And that adaptability, the learning agility to be able to hop in, like those are some things that are really desirable and needed. I think the storytelling aspect of it too, and really just owning that is important in that process.
Yeah, I think it's super important. And I think one thing that I would say to people out there when it comes to traditional resumes or something like that, if you have this unconventional experience, you just have to captivate a recruiter or an ATS, right? So, from a technical standpoint, obviously you want to have your skills and all these different types of things. But I think now we're moving beyond ATSs, applicant tracking systems out there for people who are unfamiliar, and we're getting to be more based on connections. So the better you are at telling your story and articulating things to people, the better off you'll be in the long run. So the job that you may not get today because an applicant tracking system looks at your resume and says, nah, and just automatically AI rejects you, if you can articulate who you are as a person to somebody who could potentially be a hiring manager in the future, guess what? You're already in the door. So I would implore people to work on their storytelling skills. Again, get down with a sheet of paper, write out what I'm good at, write out what I'm not so good at, and realize how can I use these strengths and weaknesses to tell a story that's worth listening to? Because I could be giving a speech right now to somebody, and in 10 years, they could be my hiring manager, or they could know somebody, or they could be connected to somebody on LinkedIn. So don't leave it up to AI to whether you get hired or not, or to where anybody gets to see your resume. Take the power back into your own hands, tell your own story, so that whether it's in 2 weeks, 2 years, or 2 decades, you'll find yourself with a favorable opportunity that's aligned with who you are.
Yes, yes, yes. And the advocates, right, that we have through the connections that we make, and the more people that get to know us and get to understand, and learn about where you come from, what you went through, and those experiences, they can become those advocates later on and can be the very reason why you get to, have that conversation with the person who may be your next, hiring manager, or, maybe your next employer in that way. So,
Exactly. No, that's the truth. And I think that, it works a little bit more so for you and I because, again, we understand the importance of team dynamics and all these different things. But for my people out there that are going to be on LinkedIn, one parallel that I can make for you is use the recommendation section. So if you've ever worked with anybody out there in any capacity and they can vouch for you on your leadership skills, they can vouch for you on your social media work, that is a very tangible way for you to address shortcomings in your resume. Because guess what? A line on a resume is weighs way less than somebody actually stepping up and say, no, I saw that person do that and they did a damn good job at it. So don't be afraid to step outside of your comfort zone and say, hey, if you ever need anything or if I need a recommendation, no, like it's the reason why it's a thing and there's a reason why it's a section for it. So if you're out there, if you're on the job hunt and you're not getting any traction, go to your recommendations, go to people you work with and just say, hey, I would really appreciate this and stack those because they can address gaps in your resume. They can address any potential concerns that a recruiter may have. And it's a way that, again, you can advocate for yourself with your network.
100%. Those endorsements are everything. And I think there's so many ways that even now with AI and just using tools that are available to us, that you can get very creative with it and really keep it personal at the same time. You just eliminate some of the manual work in the process, which I think is what the power is in using these tools. So, yeah, great conversation. I want to ask you about. Um, I have overcome some injuries last year, or I guess it was at the end of 2023. I had a shoulder surgery that set me back, and I went down this whole journey, the whole thing. And I'm finally feeling good again. But I do know throughout basketball, throughout what I went through recently, that injuries can be big setbacks, and we can also learn a lot through that. So I'd love to hear more about your own experience with injuries, and then more specifically back in September 2024 you had a very devastating knee injury, and I know you're going through a lot right now in this process. So take us there a little bit and speak to some of those things.
Oh no, you can tell the people, like I told you straight up, this might not happen today because I might have been fresh out of surgery. So
Yeah.
yeah, I'm glad you're feeling better though with the shoulder situation. Obviously,
Yeah.
shoulders are tough. You can't do a lot of stuff. But
No.
um to answer your question, I think injuries they can be a blessing or a curse or both, depending on how you look at them. Oddly enough, the worst injury I've ever sustained in my life happened when I was retired, literally just playing with some homies and getting my Tuesday night cardio in. But last September, I was just trying to get some cardio in before I went to New York for my birthday to celebrate with my friends. And non-contact, I was dribbling down the court, playing it wrong, pretty much dislocated my knee, medically speaking. Chris speaking, my knee just exploded. But what happened was I hyperextended it, and then I also dislocated it. So it went back and then went in, whole situation. But the thing is, when you dislocate your knee, the worst thing that can possibly happen is when you actually block your femoral artery. So behind your knee, there's a small artery that branches off your femoral artery called your popliteal artery. And what that does is it connects from your femoral artery in your thigh, it supplies the blood flow to your lower leg. So in addition to the torn ACL, torn LCL, knee dislocation, torn popliteus tendon, and torn biceps femoris tendon, which is one of your three major hamstring tendons. I also blocked that artery. So it became a situation where I wasn't just fighting for my knee to be stable. It was more so of a thing where I was fighting for my life because what happened was the blood had started to pool up in my leg once it was cut off. And you get what's called compartment syndrome. What I tell people is imagine if you put a balloon inside of your hands and you keep blowing it up, eventually it's not going to have anywhere to go and it's going to burst. Now, inside of your body, if that bursts, you die. So ended up having an emergency surgery, and they do what's called a fasciotomy. So basically, they cut open the sides of your calf to release all that pressure and all that blood. And then they also, because I had that artery, what they do is a bypass. So for my bypass survivors out there, what you know is they'll take a spare vein from somewhere in your body. Usually it's your great saphenous vein in your leg, and it goes from your just under your knee to right up to your hip. And it is a vein that is responsible for sensation. It's what they use a lot of times because you technically don't need it. And it's odd that the body has somehow adapted to give us these spare veins that they can just take out and use for other things. But they take that vein out and then they cut a piece of it off to use as a bypass to connect what's been blocked. So that ended up being a 10-hour surgery. And I woke up the next day, or I woke up 10 hours later and had an X-Fix on, which is like basically a metal rod in your leg to keep your leg from bending. And I pretty much was in the hospital for 2.5 months after that. So this happened after I stopped playing, but that was something that it really changed my life because I just want to summarize this long ass story was just saying that it really made me think about one thing, and that was if I would have died during surgery, because I almost did because of the amount of blood that I lost, would I have been happy with what I have left behind for people to value in terms of a legacy? And the answer was for me, Chris Eversley, yes, professional basketball player, traveled the world, made some money, doing all these things. But selflessly, no, I hadn't left enough things of value for the world. It was a bunch of me, but not we, right? Shout out to my French people out there. But I think it's important to understand that that is how I've redefined my purpose because you can allow your injuries to be a setback or to be an enlightenment period of, okay, what's really important? So going back to our first part of this conversation of that redefining things that I alluded to with the second thing, really just repurposing who I am and how I see value. That is the drastic turn that I took to have to arrive at that destination.
Well, first I was going to say thank you. You just took us to medical school there with all of
Man.
these explanations.
I'm telling you, I know way more about the human body now than I ever wanted to. So, if any of y'all ever want like a bootleg PhD lesson, I got you.
Just hit Chris up. We'll add that to the other we'll add that to the introduction, right?
Right. But make sure you put bootleg in there as a medical disclaimer so people know I'm not serious.
Oh my gosh. No, it's I mean it's incredible to just hear that also because that came after you played, basketball and of course something you don't expect to happen.
Mhm.
One, the injury itself while you're playing, and then two, learning that while you're in the hospital that you have to undergo emergency surgery. And just I imagine all of these things are going through your mind at this time whenever you're learning of what's going on in real time. And then coming out of that, how that really can just shape and move you in a way to pursue what it is that you're doing now, right? And
Mhm.
really creating this impact that you're having through the work that you're doing to inspire the next generation in different ways and to really lead them and help them through different transitions in life after sport, and using and combining your own experience with your professional experience in the work, and to really create what you're doing. So I really think it's amazing, and really just a great way I think to wrap up and kind of bring everything together in that way, because not just with injuries, but I think each and every one of us, we go through different setbacks in life. It looks different for us all, but we all have something that we go through. But it doesn't have to be the end of your story, and you can really find purpose through that and continue to pivot and to really see your potential in different ways.
100%. And I think that's the important thing at the end of the day is realizing just like in sport, every play is going to be different. Yes, in overview, every basketball game is going to be 40 minutes. There's going to be fouls. There's going to be these different things. But just because we come down and run the same play that's in the playbook doesn't mean it's going to work every single time the same way. So I really challenge people to come off of autopilot and really think about what are you doing on a day-to-day basis that allows you to maximize your time, opportunity, and self. And if you can find those three lenses, I think it's very important because it's going to put you on a new journey of what's actually going to matter to you in 10, 15 years. And at least while you have those priorities, it gives you something to chase that you can go to sleep every night happy about and wake up every morning excited to do. So whether that's entrepreneurship, whether that's climbing the corporate ladder, like those different strokes for different folks, I get that. But I think it's important to realize that whatever journey you're on, make sure it's exciting you. Make sure it's fulfilling you at the end of the day. And I just want people to realize that a framework that I use in some of my workshops, like that are in person. It's called the FACT workshop: focus, agility slash adaptation, composure, and teamwork. All right. So in reverse, teamwork, again, find your crew, find your teams. If you're a football player, find your 11 other people. If you're a basketball player, find your four other people. I don't know how many people in the damn rugby field, but it's a lot of them. Composure. You know stuff is going to happen. Are you able to keep a cool head and not freak out and go crazy on your partner, go crazy on your boss, go crazy on your subordinates at work? Agility, adaptation. I actually saw something. I was having a conversation with a colleague earlier about how a lot of people actually misquote Darwin. It's not survival of the fittest, it's survival of the most adaptable. So, are you able to adapt and pivot, which is our favorite word for this conversation,
Yeah.
when things get in your way, when obstacles get in the way? If you're driving at the basket, can you move out the way? Can you Euro step to get past somebody for a layup? And then lastly, but obviously first, in very tenet structure that we've designed in the last minute or so, is focus. It's all here. Do you have the mental capacity and the mental acuity to sustain whatever it is that life is throwing at you? Life sucks sometimes, whether it's your family, whether it's politics, whether it's religion. Every day is going to be different. But if you can do the mental gymnastics up here, everything outside in the world is just noise. And if you know how to sit there every day and just address the facts, I think you'll be fine.
That's so good. Mic drop there, Chris.
Boom, exactly. Our AirPod drop here.
There. No, that's awesome. Thank you so much. This has been such a fruitful conversation, and I really appreciate you sharing your insights, your experiences, your wisdom. And I know there's a lot of takeaways, for me that I can sit with and that I can, channel and really take with me. So, and I know the same, goes for those listening as well. And so just thank you so much for being here, and for those who can get connected to you. First of all, you got to be a new subscriber to the newsletter.
That's
But
right.
how are some other ways that people can get in touch with you?
Honestly, LinkedIn. Um, but I honestly am big on this on the newsletter right now because it's the one way that I've identified that I can provide value to people in an actionable way every Monday. So for me, it's accountability because it makes me show up every Monday, even when I don't want to write, even when I don't create content. The athlete in me can't stop wanting to win the game. So I want to take that same mindset that drives me every week and give it to people out there. So if you're out there and you feel stuck and you just are looking for some guidance, every Monday, 7 a.m. or 6:30 a.m. Pacific, come kick it with us. And then, we have another short thing going on right now due to the injury. I have a podcast going on with a friend who has some back problems. We started something called the Chronic Couch. So partner with different brands to just raise awareness on not only their products, but giving people a safe space to listen to a podcast from people who are going through chronic injuries or different things in life. So, these are the different ways that I've found that I can provide value that's uniquely me. And I think that even if you are listening to this and you don't want to connect with me, my only ask of you is find a way that you can uniquely create value to the world, and you'll be a lot better off at the end of the day.
So good. Thanks so much, Chris. Thanks for
Thank you.
joining me. This is awesome. I'm excited to stay connected. And yeah, so I appreciate you being here and having this conversation.
No, thank you. I appreciate this. I appreciate you creating this medium. I love everybody that you're talking to and just getting different people from different spaces. And this is the way that you've identified that you can provide value, which you're obviously doing. So you and I can just lead by example here and watch the seeds grow that we plant.